into that. We're going to bring in Jeff Howe from The Athletic after a quick word from FanDuel. Super Bowl 59, one game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel. Whether you're predicting the first touchdown, who will take home the MVP, or win the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to place your bets and feel the thrill of every moment. With live betting all game long, you can jump into the action, adjust your bets, and ride the wave of excitement from the kickoff to the final whistle. Plus, make the Super Bowl even sweeter, as new customers can score $200 in bonus bets when you make your first bet. Just place a $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com/UCSS to bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. And with that, we are thrilled to welcome in Jeff Howe, who is a senior NFL insider for The Athletic. Jeff, how you doing today? Thanks for joining the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show.
Doing well. I can't imagine I'm going to be even a tenth as exciting as Kenny Lofton, so I'll just tread water as long as I can.
Oh, come on,
Yeah,
Jeff.
that's
I got
a hard
faith
follow-up, Jeff. That is a hard follow-up to be Kenny Lofton.
You got all kinds of good Patriot stories, and Brady and Bill, and I'm sure you can deliver.
I mean, I'll do the best I can. But I'm happy to keep talking about Kenny Lofton if you want.
Well, actually, let's talk about. Obviously, you just wrote a column about. You spoke to a number, I believe, GMs and coaches about what the Myles Garrett's trade value would be. Obviously, trading him is complicated. I think everybody thinks it's a no-brainer he's going to be traded. I'm not as convinced as everybody else because there's a lot of, with the cap situation, it's not going to be easy. But if the Browns are able to trade him, obviously he's going to be looking for a new contract. After you're talking to GMs and coaches, what's the gist? What do you think? We're thinking 2 firsts. What do you think?
I mean, my first reaction was it's got to be 2 firsts, but I thought the majority of people I spoke to didn't think it would get that high. I mean, I think there were 10 people who I spoke to in the past few days about what's the fair trade compensation or what can the Browns expect to get for him, and only 3 of them said it was going to be at least 2 firsts. So, I mean, who knows? It's a small sample size. Maybe I spoke to the wrong 10 people, but I think you can obviously start with a 1, and then how much more competition for him is there, and that'll drive up the price. And then you still have to figure out what the Browns are thinking. I mean, they're saying they're not going to trade him, but it's if they're going to read the room here and they realize that there's no way Myles Garrett is going to get all the way to training camp and then eventually report and help them out, and they're not going to have a choice.
Let me ask you, what do you think when we get to week 1 of the season? Do you think Myles is part of the Browns? Do you think they do the trade? And if you did trade him, would you have to trade Denzel and other pieces as well? Like, where do you think this thing goes?
I mean, they're heading for a hard reset, and I think we all know like the cap dynamics that they have to handle here. If they trade him, the cap situation's only going to get worse. And I think the hardest thing here is, trading him would make it more difficult financially, but it's also like if you look at the long term, you kind of probably want to cut ties with as many of these contracts as possible. But it all traces back, of course, to Deshaun Watson trade in his contract and then restructuring it every single year. I mean, their cap is just an absolute mess for the next several years. So it's just, I would say he's probably not going to be on the team, but I mean, this isn't like, Russell Wilson last year when the Broncos knew that they had to eventually move on from him. That also required getting rid of some important contracts. They ended up cutting Justin Simmons, who was one of the more important players in their organization. Now, they bounced back. You also look at the Packers when they moved on from Aaron Rodgers. They drafted incredibly well, and they were at least 2 years ahead of their rebuild. I mean, they basically got right back into the playoff picture. So, there is a blueprint where you can get rid of star players, guys who are meaningful to your organization, and then still be able to handle some difficult cap gymnastics. I don't know if the Browns are going to be in as good of a spot as certainly the Packers were, and we'll see what the Broncos' sustainability is.
Jeff, the Browns are one of the few teams that really pride themselves on manipulating the cap and converting dollars into signing bonuses and creating more cap space, and they've done it for years, and everyone around here has hailed them as, Jimmy's aggressive, he'll spend money, it creates all the space, da-da-da-da-da, and it's great right up until it's not great. So that's sort of the spot that they're in now. Is it good to handle the cap this way? I guess like the Eagles do this all the time, but the Eagles seem to make all the right choices on who to convert with, and so it's never really blown up on them. Atlanta, it blew up on them with Matt Ryan. Where do you fall on? And people in Cleveland say the cap is a myth, the cap isn't real. Well, the cap's certainly starting to feel pretty real now. So you see where I'm going with this? Like, is it a good thing or is it not a good thing to be able to convert as many contracts as they do? I don't think a lot of owners will spend as much money as Jimmy does. All the credit to him for spending the money. But ultimately, it still has left them in a pretty big trap here.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to go all in. I mean, it's paid off for, look at the Buccaneers when they had the Tom Brady window. It worked for a bit with the Rams before they had a hard reset and then had to take a step back. I mean, but then you look at the Saints, they've employed the same strategy for over a decade, and it's hit them pretty hard the last couple of years too. So it works until it doesn't, which is, it sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but you can always go all in. I firmly believe that you can manipulate the cap as much as you want to, but that bill is going to come. And if you don't maximize your window while your chips are all the way in the middle of the table, then you have this really difficult time that the Browns are facing. Now, they've gotten a situation with, you're right. Jimmy Haslam has shown to spend as much money as necessary to help this organization function as high a degree as possible, whether that's on or off the field. The problem is when you invest so much money into a quarterback and then continue to kick the can down the road with the restructures, that bill is going to come due. It's great to spend the money, but you have to invest those resources wisely. And when you don't, eventually that rug is going to get pulled out from under you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's not. It's only hurting them because Watson stinks. If Watson had been the player he was in Houston, nothing would be an issue. The cap wouldn't be an issue right now if Watson had still been good because they would be much better. Myles Garrett wouldn't want to be traded, and none of that would be a problem. But if you do go on and on and on and on, and you screw it up, as has been the case with Watson, then eventually it's going to come due. But that has put the Browns here in this situation, and they've kind of run out of guys to restructure at this point, haven't they, Jeff? I mean, they don't have anybody else.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, you look at the contracts, there's not a whole lot of room where they can make up a ton of grounds. And the one area, of course, is that Watson contract. But there's never like one path that you can take. So you can break this down 100 different ways. But like the next time you restructure his contract, I mean, what's that going to do to the void years? How much longer are you really going to tether yourself to his contracts down the road? Like you're talking into the 2030s at this point. So how much worse can that really get? It's just it all traces back to one decision, and it's one that has been called. It was called pretty quickly. More of a projection. The worst trade of all time. But I think now looking back in hindsight, you look at the trade, the draft capital, the contracts, of course, the restructures, and the fact that again, this contract is going to be tied to your organization for years longer before, when he's long gone or playing elsewhere or retired.
Jeff, I'm sitting here and I had seen David Njoku talking about that he's doing this pitch to keep Myles Garrett here, and he's saying that the Browns just need a healthy quarterback right now. When you look at this team and how they performed last year, do you think that a healthy quarterback, a good healthy quarterback, is all this team is just missing?
No. I mean, it's hard to, because like Joe Flacco played statistically the best football of his career down the stretch 2 seasons, or last season, I guess technically, and the coaching's there. Stefanski obviously knows what he's doing. And they've had the plug and play approach work to an extent. It looked like it was going to take off again with Jameis Winston before the bottom fell out there too. There's so much more that goes into it, and that's why I think you look at Myles Garrett's statement and saying that he wants to prioritize a Super Bowl, and you never know until really the dust settles. Was it the Super Bowl? Was it the contract? Maybe it was 60-40 one way, swayed in one direction over the other. I don't know. We'll let the proof kind of show us what he means there. But if the Super Bowl is realistic, like the path in Cleveland, it just doesn't exist. Not for the next 2 years. I mean, you still need that hard reset. And it's not like there's a bona fide superstar in the draft class at quarterback. That's the other really tricky thing here. I mean, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, the spotlight's on those guys for the first and second pick. But, I haven't found anybody who's told me directly that they would, and this is not just over the last week. You hear the criticism of its lying season. This is research that I've done or conversations I've had back into like the midway point in the college football season. I haven't found anybody who has said, again, told me directly that they would rank either of those guys ahead of the 6 first-rounders from the 24 class. Now, I spoke to somebody else last week who was like, and I would guarantee 90% of the people here at the Senior Bowl would agree with that. So you're talking about 90% of the league that doesn't think that these guys are ranked ahead of the top 6 from last year's class. That's trouble. If you aren't fully in love with either one of these quarterbacks and you take him at 2 and it doesn't pan out, you can't develop him, then you're talking about a reset that's going to be significantly worse than we've even discussed. Now, who knows? Maybe it does work out. Maybe you can draft and develop them, and they can be a franchise savior. It just looks like more of a long shot this year than in most draft classes. And then the other tricky part, too, is you look at the 26 class that could be potentially headlined by Arch Manning, but he's not the only gem in that class. I mean, there's like 3, 4, or 5 guys who could be really good franchise caliber quarterbacks coming out a year from now. So if you're Cleveland and you have that number 2 pick and you take a quarterback with that number 2 pick, you are effectively skipping that entire 26 class, and you have to hope for the next 2 years at least that guy develops. Otherwise, you are compounding a mistake that's going to get a whole lot worse.
Jeff, you're speaking my love language. I've said that for weeks now, that the Browns should trade Myles for 26 picks to give yourself the draft capital to move around the board, to move up. We all know how much Jimmy Haslam loves the Manning family. And Arch may not even come out. Arch could go back for a second to be a starter for 2 years, especially with NIL money. But there's so many more options in that quarterback draft. When you compile on top of that the dome that they're trying to get built here, it just feels to me like 2025 is a transition season for the Browns. The worst thing they could do is take a quarterback they don't love just because people are trying to save jobs, because they're going to get fired anyway. If you take a quarterback who's not any good, you're going to get fired anyway. Use 25 as a season of transition to try and clean up the books a little bit, muddle through, and try and have some sort of a reset for 26 and beyond. Find your quarterback in 26. I don't know where they're going to find a quarterback.
But they have to be up there, because if these guys if there's 3 generational quarterbacks at the top of the 26th draft, well, teams are not going to trade down if these are truly generational quarterbacks.
Sure, but there's always going to be movement. There's always movement. There's going to be a team up there that has if the Jaguars are bad again, they're not going to move off Trevor Lawrence, are they?
They might.
Well,
if these guys are great, but I get what you're saying.
There's always going to be some sort of movement, so like if you're the Browns, you want to be bad enough to be somewhat in position, but not so bad you get fired. It's just a weird, tricky spot for them to be in.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's a question in there. Was there a question in there? I guess we're just having a conversation.
I'll just jump off. I'll continue the conversation and the good vibes that we've created here. If you're like, the dilemma then becomes, all right, you need a stopgap core. Let's say you're going into free agency knowing that you either get Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, which is fine. I think that is probably the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario, of course, being you nail the quarterback pick. But again, playing the odds, I think Hunter or Carter would be great. So then what do you do a quarterback? You're going to need a stopgap. You're going to probably be in the Kirk Cousins market. Assuming the Falcons are cut Cousins and they don't find a trade partner, he's coming in. He's going to play in the offset money, similar to Russell Wilson with the Steelers and the Broncos this year. Played on the minimum. The Broncos covered the rest of the tab. Kirk Cousins is going to be able to do the same thing, and I don't think anybody's really going to be rushing to give him a contract that's going to be worth in excess of $27.5 next season. So then you go, okay, can you get Kirk Cousins? And if you can, great. That's going to help the product on the field. But how dramatically do you really want to help that product if you're looking truly at the 26th draft to be the one that saves your franchise?
Yeah,
that's right. Let Deshaun Watson play quarterback with a busted Achilles next year. Jeff, last thing, Joe Burrow once again, multiple times now, has come out and said, we better sign these guys.
He said he restructuring his contract.
He said he'd be willing to change his contract around today. There's no excuse for the Bengals. I keep hearing the Bengals can't sign everybody. What everybody? They could sign Chase, Higgins, and
Hendrickson.
Hendrickson. I couldn't think of his name for a second. What do you think Joe Burrow's comments and pressure will make any difference for a normally cheap Bengal front office?
No, I don't. And that's not. I'm not trying to report that. That's my opinion. So I want to make sure that's clarified. But you look at the history of the organization and just the way the cap is set up across the league. And now, again, I'm fully in the camp. You can manipulate the cap any way you want. They can absolutely extend or re-sign, however you want to put it, those guys. You can keep all of them happy. You can keep that core together. You just better make damn sure that you're going to draft and help out the middle class of that roster for the foreseeable future. So there's a lot that goes into that. But then you look at Jamar Chase is going to get somewhere close to $40 million a year. T. Higgins is absolutely getting at least 30, probably something like the Ayuk contract.
Yeah.
There's never been a team in NFL history. Now, granted, the exploding contracts limit that history.
Sure.
But there's never been a team in history that's had two $30 million receivers and a $50 million quarterback and go out. I mean, just you look at the way that the quarterback 2018, Matt Ryan became the first $30 million quarterback. Right now, Matt Ryan, under that contract, would be like the 20th highest paid quarterback in the league. But, you look at the way the cap dynamics have changed at that position, and you have all these $50 million guys. Patrick Mahomes is still the only one who has proven that he can lead his franchise to a Super Bowl on a $50+ or on a $40+ million contract. So this is... all these teams are trying to – I understand why they're doing it. I'm not saying extending Joe Burrow is ever a mistake. It's not. In my opinion, he's the second or third best quarterback in the league, so you pay whatever you got to pay. But you're still in this uncomfortable position where you're all these teams trying to knock off the Chiefs, and the Eagles are included. Somebody has to prove that they can do it with a quarterback on that type of contract. And – I mean, I think that's another part of Mahomes' greatness.
Yeah.
There's a lot more than just Mahomes and Andy Reid, of course.
Yeah.
But the fact that guy has been able to win multiple Super Bowls on, a $45+ $48 million a year average annual value salary is incredible, and it's furthering his gap between himself and the rest of those elite quarterbacks around the league.
Last thing, is that a Dayton Dragons hat?
No, this is a Lowell Spinners hat. This is the
Lowell
minor league
Spinners
baseball team. Where
I've called
Here
games
we
at that
go.
stadium. I've called games at the Lowell Spinners
We
Stadium.
sure you have.
Here we
boo.
go. With minor baseball
Well, it's
players.
called minor league baseball. It's a
We
story
stayed
as
at a
old as
nice
time.
hotel outside of
Right
Lowell.
next to
it was
the
like a double
toilets.
tree
Can
or
you
something.
make it
was
through an
really
interview
nice.
without talking
Oh,
about the
the double
Bengals
trees
minor
in
league
the
baseball
Probably not.
or pizza in Brooklyn?
Probably not. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, Jeff, we appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming
Thanks,
on the
Jeff.
Sports Show today.
Thanks, buddy.
Always
Nice
happy
follow.
to talk Lowell and Kenny Lofton. Thanks, guys.